Welcome to a special edition of Top Lines and Tails, the nation's favourite livestock podcast. And this week, after some speculation in the press and a little bit of worry amongst some of the people on social media and farmers generally everywhere in the UK, we're going to discuss the issue of blue tongue. The blue tongue virus that is at the moment, as we go forward with this episode, at the moment is contained to the east of the country. So hopefully this will work as a public service for everybody, that we can get a little bit more clarity on the blue tongue virus. And don't forget, of course, the Top Lines and Tails podcast is sponsored by Harbro, so we always thank Harbro very much for their involvement in keeping this podcast going. This week, we're doing a special episode talking about blue tongue, and I'm privileged to have on the call Phil Stocker, and Phil's been on here before. Phil is the Chief Executive of the National Sheep Association. Phil, welcome back to Top Lines and Tails.
Thanks, Andy. It's good to be back. Although it's a shame we're talking about this subject, which is not welcome, but it is good to be back with you.
Yeah, thank you. And it is, I asked a few people and everybody sort of pointed to you as the expert, or the one who is most ginned up on what's going on, and not only through the NSA, but of course collaborating with the government on our behalf. So to start with, I thank you for speaking to us. And to start with, we're not scaremongering here at all. We're just looking for facts, as there seems to be, everything's a little bit muddled and unclear as to what's going on, what blue tongue is, what it means to us, what problems it's going to cause to us, and maybe how it's going to pan out. So this is why I've come to you. And let's start with the beginning, Phil. It's a blue tongue virus. It is a virus, right?
Yeah, it is a virus. This one this virus is transmitted by midges. So it's both sheep and cattle. Ruminants, camelids are affected as well. Pigs aren't affected and horses aren't affected, but it's mainly ruminants. Okay. It's purely transmitted by midges. So animals need to be bitten by midges that are infected with blue tongue, and then they're likely to contract the virus. And the virus cannot be passed between animals. So sheep can't pass it to other sheep, or cattle can't pass it to sheep. It's midge transmitted.
We'll go on to that in a second. And you say the midges, yes, they bite an infected animal and then they bite a non-infected animal, and these things seem to have a pretty good flight on them as well. I mean, I read somewhere that the infected midges blowing across the channel from the Netherlands. So I mean, that sounds a bit unlikely, Phil.
Well, that's definitely how it arrived here. And it first arrived here, if you remember, back last year around November time. We had the first incursion of midges blown over from the Netherlands, and we managed to contain that outbreak. And we declared ourselves blue tongue free. It wasn't circulating, the virus wasn't circulating here in Britain. And we've been waiting with bated breath really since then, sort of almost expecting it to come back over from the continent again. And, it did at the end of, in early August. That was when we think the first midges came over. So again, this summer, the virus started off here by midges coming over from the channel, being blown over by the wind. And there is a level of recirculation going on now. So our domestic midges, if you like, are starting to spread the virus here by biting infected animals and then moving on and passing it on to other animals.
Okay, so we do have, let's just clarify one thing first. Blue tongue, do the animals' tongues turn blue? Is that one of the symptoms?
In extreme cases, you do see animals with purple or blue tongues, but most of the symptoms we're seeing in the UK so far would be lameness to begin with, listlessness, blisters and lesions in the lips and on the gums, a swelling around the coronary band of the hoof as well, some salivation and weeping eyes, those sorts of things. But yeah, that blue tongue, I guess, that comes very much from the swollen tongue, and we are seeing some of that, but I think it's in the more extreme cases.
Sounds like some of the symptoms you just read out there sound like foot and mouth to me. I hope the two haven't been confused. I assume not.
No. I mean, there's been some very intensive laboratory-based testing going on here, and this is definitely, an unusual strain of blue tongue too. It's blue tongue virus 3. It's one that it was only last year, I guess, was seen in northern Europe for the first time. It's normally seen down in Asia and Africa. and for some reason, no one knows quite how. I don't think that it spread from Asia up into Holland. That was where it was first seen, and they had a really bad time with it last year. A really, really bad time. I think there's somewhere in the region of 6,000 affected premises in Holland now, and it's really hit them very, very, very hard.
One of my questions I'd save to ask you a little bit later was how it is impacted across Europe. Just one thing I pick up that you said there, that the midges came over here, but now our midges are biting infected animals and then themselves spreading that midge. So have we got the same type of midge? I was under the impression, a lot of us were under the impression, it was a specific type of midge that only kind of lived in Europe and in Western Europe.
It is a specific midge. It's a midge called Culling, and it is a particular midge that transmits this, but it is it's resident, if you like, here in the UK. That type of midge. Yeah.
So we have that midge here already. Despite this, could our midges gone over there and got it and come back?
It would be unusual, really, with wind direction. I think that would be, and I don't think midges. I'm not sure that midges actually work like that. They've got relatively short life cycles, and this would have been midges that have come over with that that westerly wind that often blows across from the continent to the UK. This has been predicted. That the Met Office and DEFRA and APHA and Pirbright have all been working and monitoring this for over a year, looking at wind speeds, looking at wind direction, looking at predicting when midges might hit our shores, and if they do, when. And I would have to say their predictions have been pretty accurate. If you look at the wind speed, back in early August, it was, and the wind direction, it was coming up that eastern coast, and even up as far as that East Yorkshire coast as well. And of course, we had that one case in East Yorkshire just last week.
I'll go on to the control zones in a second, because obviously we want to clarify that and what they mean. But if we just go back to those insects, is there no way we can treat them? I treat my dogs against insects. I mean, it's not a possibility that the animals can. I know there's a vaccination that's been talked about, and again, I'll go into that. But isn't it just as simple as killing the insects and moving on?
No, most of the insecticides that we've got available. It doesn't seem like they offer a great deal of protection. There are people out there that think that there's plenty of farmers that actually want to do something, and why wouldn't you? If you're faced with this infection, the natural reaction is that you want to do something. But there's little evidence that any of the insecticides actually avoid infection, and many of the insecticides actually require the midge to bite to then kill the midge. And of course, once it's bitten, it's infected already, really. So again, it may dampen down transmission, possibly, but it's and I can understand why people are doing it. But at the moment, I'd have to say that there's little evidence that suggests that the use of insecticides will really help to avoid this problem.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that's clarified that. I've had a few questions come in from some of our Top Lines and Tails listeners, and that was one of those. And another one is, how does it actually affect the animals? I read an article, a distressing article, I think in a daily newspaper, saying that the chief sheep steward, I can't remember his name now, from the Suffolk show, had animals dying, and sheep dying from blue tongue. And again, we were all led to believe that, I wouldn't say it was harmless, but they kind of got over it.
Yeah, well, I understand that there've been a very small number of mortalities here so far. We're up at the point of having 34 infected or affected premises here in England at the moment. You would say that it's still relatively small. There would be just over 100 cases this year of animals, but there's only been a handful of actual mortalities in the very early stages. DEFRA were actually culling animals, euthanizing animals humanely, obviously, because they wanted to prevent further transmission of the virus. So in the very early days, animals were being put down before they got to the point of dying. But actually, since that policy has ended, I'm not sure that we're seeing much mortality. Some farmers are choosing to have the animals put down on welfare grounds. We're hearing that some animals are showing signs of recovery. But so mortality is certainly a risk. It's there, but for those animals that get over it, or those animals that aren't affected so badly, there's still serious productivity losses. In
Sure.
dairy cows, losses in or reductions in milk yield, and we all know that sick and unhealthy sheep don't thrive as well and grow so well, and so it does affect profitability and productivity, and productivity will affect profitability too.
Okay, and that's something I was going to go on to was the culling. Maybe it's another question that I had there, but if we just go back, to some of these animals there, the cattle and the sheep, people want to be assured, do they show the similar types of symptoms? Is it harder hitting in sheep, harder hitting in cattle, and what's the sort of incubation period that we're expecting to see from when the time they get bitten to when they start showing symptoms? These are questions that are raised all the time, Phil.
Yeah, they are, aren't they, really? And the experience in Holland suggested that this hit sheep far worse than it did cattle. And there was definitely some signs out there that cattle could carry the virus which was showing very few clinical signs as well. And I think that's probably been the experience in England so far as well. There's certainly been just as many cattle actually found or identified positive with BTV3 as there has sheep, but I think the clinical signs are worse in sheep, and that would be what we would expect as well. What was the second part of your question?
The incubation period. Yes. From when
so we're looking at a period of around about 10 days to 2 weeks between being bitten and that animal becoming viremic and it risks for other animals. So a period of a couple of weeks. And of course, if and when, we will see vaccines. I mean, vaccines have now received this emergency authorization. But again, there is that period of a couple of weeks before even vaccinated animals become or build up a level of immunity as well.
Okay, and the level of immunity, of course, is something that we're after. But yes, that incubation period is a slight worry, isn't it? I mean, we've got exclusion zones or control zones, should I say? I'll go into in a second. But if an animal, I suppose, has been bitten and then within the control zone and then it's been moved on, we know from foot and mouth, and we know from obviously your stats within the sheep world that animals do have. They do get around the countryside, and of course we're bang in the middle of sheep breeding season now, bang in the middle of sheep sale season, and that must be quite concerning at this very moment in time, Phil.
Yeah, it is hugely concerning, and it's been concerning and worrying and affected a lot of farmers within those restricted zones for close on a couple of weeks now. And as you say, we're approaching that time when a lot of sheep move around the country. Now, you'd have to say from what we've seen so far that the policy that has been put in place, which are fairly strict movement controls from animals from those RZs, have been being effective. It's one of the fastest ways to move this virus around the country is just to allow freedom of movements of animals. So to really restrict animals that are moving out from that restricted zone without them being blood tested, but prior to moving, and then tested again post-movement, is the right approach. So at the moment, DEFRA are allowing a relatively free movement of animals within the zones, but with a very strict warning that farmers should try to reduce those moves to only moves that are absolutely necessary. I mean, if you imagine it would be very easy for a farmer to move animals out to the edge of a restricted zone, and then creating an opportunity for onward transmission, I guess. So farmers need to be really careful about this and only move animals if it's absolutely necessary. And of course, any animals can move from the zone, from within the restricted zone to slaughter, as long as it's within a designated plant. And we've got a reasonable number of designated plants around the country now. Okay. So people are managing to move animals out to slaughter, which is helping things. But there's some big questions. If this continues to spread over these next weeks and it starts to move into those higher density livestock areas, those areas such as the north of England, maybe, that are dependent on moving animals, breeding animals around the country, that's going to get very, very serious. And there is also a question about those farmers within the RZs, areas of infectivity, if you like, spending good money at the moment on breeding animals and bringing them into an area where they're at risk of contracting the virus and potentially dying with no compensation. It's a tough call to make on people.
Okay, that's somewhere I want to get on. But firstly, I just want to clarify, I'm a little bit confused, and I think maybe our listener are a little bit confused. The statement you made earlier on, and I will just quote actually that the AHDB on their website says that the disease cannot spread from animal to animal, and yet we're talking about animals going out with the restriction zone and then infecting other animals. And the one is a bit of an antagonist of the other, really. If they can affect each other, then obviously it's a massive issue. But if they can't infect each other from animal to animal, and how's this thing spreading once the animals start to move?
So what happens is that you might have an animal that is infected, unnoticed, if you're not careful, unnoticed, and it's moved into another part of the country, maybe to the edge of the restricted zone. And then that infected animal then gets bitten by a local midge, and that midge hops over the restricted zone boundary and bites another animal. Then that animal becomes infected. So you're just moving the source, the reservoir of that infection to new parts of the zone. Or if you move them outside of the zone, you're moving them into an uninfected area and then just allowing that transmission to go on again. So it's moving animals and then moving that reservoir of infection that allows midges then to further transmit that virus.
Okay, that clarifies that. Thank you. Now, with regards to the midges themselves, I mean, I'm sure you're no midge expert, although you might have learned a lot about them in the last 6 months or 12 months or so. I mean, there will be experts out there in midges of obviously all sorts of different types, and there will only be a certain amount, I gather, that different types will carry this disease. Are there areas where there are known, for God's sake, we go to Scotland, you go to Scotland in the summer, you get certain parts of Scotland, eaten alive by midges. Are there areas in the country where there are midges and areas maybe where there aren't? Do they not like certain parts of the country, or has everyone got midges that can carry this
My
disease?
understanding is that everywhere's got the midges, and this species, a particular species of midges that can transmit blue tongue V3. But there are areas that are particularly conducive to midges, and they would be those damp areas. So, possibly the area that blue tongue arrived in England, which is Norfolk. You've got a wide area there of grazing marshes, reed beds, damp areas, and those sorts of areas are particularly conducive to midge activity, as we all know.
Okay, right there, that makes sense again. And of course, you've got those areas being bordered by the big arable lands where there are no livestock, which you'd like to think would contain. And I think we're going to go on to the control zone, but I think the control zone pretty much is from Brighton to the Wash. So pretty much all that east side of the country is up as far as the Wash is
the restricted zone includes the counties of Essex, Norfolk, and Suffolk. So that is the restricted zone. Okay. So that doesn't, my geography suggests that doesn't go down as far as Brighton. Although those the areas of Kent and West Sussex would be seen as high risk areas and areas that are really vulnerable, but they're not within the restricted zone at the moment.
Okay, certainly a map that I saw sort of showed it down as far as Brighton, but maybe there's.
I think that the map that you've seen, and again the map that many farmers might have seen on the gov.uk webpage, actually shows the area that was affected back last autumn and over the winter months.
Okay, right. We'll talk about months again because there is obviously a variation between parts of the year. One thing that I did notice that WOA, are they the World Health Organization for Animals, is it? WOA, I don't know how you pronounce that. They say that the infection can be spread by semen. The rams that have been brought in that have been infected can then infect that into other animals, which contradicts the HDB and yourself, for that matter, saying it can't be spread from animal to animal. I mean, is there any truth in that, or is this a
there is truth in that. There is truth in that. And when I say it can't be spread from, and the HDB say it can't be spread from animal to animal, that would be through nose contact or salival contact, but no, it can be spread through semen. And the companies in the UK that are active in the germinal products, taking semen, freezing semen, inseminating rams, and the same with embryos as well, are very aware of this. And there's been some fairly serious blood testing going on before they've taken that germplasm material as well. But they're caught up in this as well, and there's strict controls over the moving of semen and embryos out of the restricted zones at the moment, too. They're being treated in exactly the same way as live animals.
Okay, again, because that's a busy time of year. Kelso ram sales this week, as you know, Bill's ram sales as well. Those are the two main providers of livestock, of sires in the sheep business throughout the country, and people want to be assured, I suppose, that if they're buying animals, that they're not buying an animal that the semen is then going to, I mean, realistically, could infect their entire flock. Would a top with 70 ewes, you could infect the entire lot through that. So you're pretty assured that those restrictions are in place. I sold a ram just out of interest. I sold a ram to a guy in Norfolk who's now in a restriction zone, and I desperately want to get a son of his back, and obviously I can't do that.
No, absolutely. So those sales, Calcio and Bill's coming up. I mean, anyone outside of those restricted zone count is still free to move rounds to those sales, and they can go back into the restricted zone if if a farmer chooses to make that purchase and move them as well. So. But there are controls, and again, the advice is that there's two things there really. Farmers should be going out of their way to visually inspect all their animals now, whenever they're moving and everywhere. I would say they should just give them a mouth check, just check that they're not lame, just look at the general health of them, and if there are any suspicious symptoms, then obviously speak to the vet. That goes without saying. Anyway, but farmers should take absolute care in terms of moving these animals. And the other thing to say is that APHA and DEFRA are offering free blood testing, laboratory fees of blood testing are being picked up by DEFRA and APHA. So farmers can actually, within the zone, they can take advantage of those free tests. So they can get their animals checked for whether they're positive or negative. And if they go through that testing, then they can move them out of the zone to live as well, for breeding.
Okay, that's good news then, and that's great that DEFRA are doing that. Well, in a minute we'll see what else DEFRA are doing. One thing DEFRA have done is suggested that we keep animals indoors at night. I'm not quite sure what the logic behind that one is. There's something I read on a DEFRA website. Does that make sense?
Well, it does make sense in that it was found to be helpful. I wouldn't say effective, but it's found to be helpful in the Netherlands that it protected animals during the late evening and the early morning when midges were fairly active, really just to house them. But whilst that might work for small numbers of possibly high value or precious animals, lots of our farms here in England haven't got the facilities to be able to do that, particularly if they've got sheep out on keep away from buildings. It's just not practical. And we keep sheep in a very different way to the way they do in Holland. Our flocks are much bigger and they're more extensive and grass-based. So it might help, but it's certainly not for the majority.
Okay, that obviously applies to cattle as well. Although later in the year, of course, these cattle will come in, which we'll come on to in a second, the different times of year, as I mentioned. One other thing that I've seen is that these last 2 or 3 cases have been found through surveillance testing. Or is that drones going up, or what does surveillance testing mean?
No, surveillance testing means that APHA are active out there, looking at the high-risk areas, looking at the high-risk farms, and just doing some random blood testing to try and get a track on where the virus is and where it's going. Okay. So this is physical surveillance that is being done by APHA vets.
Okay, so we're not sending out drones to have a look to see if they're good or bad. I'm sure there must be ways of doing that at some stage in the maybe distant future. And another question that's come through from one of my listeners is how many variants of this are? You mentioned BVA3, so BVT3 rather. So that's is that the third one? I mean, I saw somewhere there were 25 or 30 different variants of this disease. Is it mutating? Is it a bit like COVID-19, 20 and 19 ABC, etc.?
Well, there's probably other people that are far better qualified to talk about that than I am, really. But there are a number of different variants. I don't know how many, but many of our farmers will remember Blue Tongue 8 that we had some years ago, and BTV4 was another one, and BTV1 is another strain that has been active, although I don't think we've seen that one here. So I think BTV3 is the third main one that we've heard of here and experienced here. BTV8 is still circulating, and I think 4 in some parts of mainland Europe. But again, it's not evident here just at the moment.
Okay, I was going to say that's the thing with different variants where they're in different places. I mean, we talk about mainland Europe. How far are we talking going east here? We're talking about going across to Ukraine and into Russia and further east, or is it just sort of...
BTV8 is still active in some parts of France, so not so far away, I guess.
No, not so far away from me as it happens, and probably I'll be helping be disinfected when I go through the ports, which is probably a good thing. Let's just talk about. In fact, I'll go on to the import exports in a second. Phil, sorry to keep you so long, but it's interesting, I think, to all of us. And you talk about it, the winter time. We're going into winter now. Generally, I know we live with midges here in France, mosquitoes that sort of bite you through the autumn, and you get into the winter, and all of a sudden they bugger off, thankfully, and the cold weather kills them. So are we praying for a cold winter that's going to slow this thing down?
Yeah, and I guess that's one of our greatest hopes now that this virus didn't really get going here until it was late August. So at least it's the back end of the summer, and the best thing that could happen now is that we had some temperature drops, and again that led to a lower level of midge activity. It's somewhere around 12 to 15 degrees that midges start to become less active and don't feed. So even in the wintertime, when we see midges around when we get a bit of rare warm sunshine, you suddenly see a bit of midge activity. It would be unusual for those midges to be feeding much at that time. So the winter time and those colder temperatures are definitely seen as a period of much lower risk, and I guess that's what we hope for at the moment, that those temperatures will drop a little bit and there'll be fewer midges, and we'll go into a safer time. That then leaves the prospect or the risk of just of going into next year, because if we have got pockets of infection here, if we have got positive animals around, if it is endemic within our own midge population, when the temperatures rise next spring, we could be in a worse situation. But again, we would hope that by that time, we'll have learned a lot more about this virus, about the effects of it, and the vaccines will be a little bit more advanced than they are now too. Okay. So we'll be able to do more to protect our stock with a bit of luck by next spring.
Okay, we'll go. That makes great sense. I mean, I've had the fire lit the last couple of days there, so I know one or two people around the countryside have felt a little bit of a few cold nights coming now. But you think if we get down below 10 or 12 degrees, then that starts to show. And will a good hard winter really give it some punishment, or do midges just come back year on year regardless?
Well, it does. Really cold temperatures, prolonged period of cold temperatures does a lot of good, doesn't it, in terms of killing all sorts of bugs and pests and diseases and all sorts. And we don't get them anywhere near as frequently as we used to, but a good hard winter would help. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, that's cool. And just going on to the control zones, we've talked mainly through that now, but the control zones, how far does the exclusion go? Let's say a case pops up in Yorkshire. Do we shut Yorkshire down, or is it a sort of 20-mile exclusion zone, or is it just based on each different area where there are different ideas?
Yeah, I think it would be based on each different individual case, whatever happens. But what happened in on the east coast of Yorkshire, it was an isolated case that was reported. It was blood tested and proved to be positive, and then they set up a 20-kilometre zone around that farm to stop movements out of that zone and control movements within it as well. And what they would have done then was to get busy doing some surveillance testing around to see whether there were any other cases or whether it was just an isolated case. And at the moment, my understanding is that does seem to have been just one isolated case, but they will be doing some more surveillance. And again, people will be looking out for clinical signs, visual signs of any other infection in the windward side of that case. Yeah.
That was just 3 days ago, so I suppose we have to hang on with and cross our fingers that one hasn't gone with the 10-day incubation period that we talked about. And what's going on in Europe then? You're saying it's in Northern Europe. Are they doing anything about it, Phil, or are they just living with it?
They're vaccinating now. I mean, they've had both Holland and Belgium have had this emergency authorization for Bluetongue 3 vaccines. There are 3 vaccines that are available now. So they've been busy vaccinating for some time now. And I think it's fair to say, I mean, we really welcome the development of the vaccine. It's a really important tool in our toolbox, I guess, but it is probably important as well to stress that this doesn't prevent the disease. It suppresses symptoms. It's possibly likely to just dampen down transmission and infectivity, but it doesn't stop the disease and it doesn't stop infectivity or onward transmission. It will dampen down or suppress clinical symptoms. So levels of mortality have been shown to be lower, and the welfare impact on the animals has been shown to be less as well. So it's helpful, but it's not a silver bullet. No, none of these things are a silver bullet on their own.
No, as likewise with foot and mouth, it has its drawbacks as well. I suppose on drawbacks as well, there will be a withdrawal period from vaccine. Is that total? I mean, when they're vaccinated, can they still go into the food chain? How long are we talking here?
Yeah, there is no withdrawal period, and they can still go into the food chain. All there is no danger to product quality or human health or anything like that. So, our understanding is that vaccinated animals can still enter the food chain and can still be exported as well as meat.
Okay.
What we've lost at the moment is our ability to be able to export any live animals because we've now got our blue tongue status is one of being an infected nation, if you like, a positive nation, and we're not able to export any breeding animals at the moment.
Okay, maybe pick up on that now. Then I was going to jump into that one, but yes, we are. Of course, Ireland now has excluded all exports from us, which is probably the only difference really. Up until now, Brexit had slowed our exports down into Northern Europe anyway, but now Ireland can't take any animals from the UK. And DERA, which is the Irish equivalent of or Northern Irish equivalent of our DEFRA, said that the country needs to be minimum disease-free space for 2 years. Is that the words that you're hearing as well?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, no, that's my understanding. Is we'll have a 2 year period now where we need to go through a 2 year period of no cases for us to regain our blue tongue free status again and been able to export live animals. So, sadly, the industry's had a really tough time since our departure from the European Union. We've exported far fewer animals than we would normally do, and yet the demand out there for our good quality genetics is really, really strong. But Brexit paid to an awful lot of that. We were moving some animals around to Northern Ireland and down through into mainland Europe in that direction, but that's stopped now as well. So some of our pedigree breeders have lost a lot of really valuable and important trade there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, true, and. Again, controversial. I suppose Scotland likes to think that it's a different country to England in a lot of ways, and I suppose Wales in that matter too. But then, if the disease is blowing east to west, which it seems to do, is there a chance that Scotland can close the borders and try and keep themselves disease-free if it creeps up the country?
Well, I think all areas outside of the restricted zone will be doing what they can to keep themselves disease free, and I guess that's what a lot of DEFRA policy is about now. But you're quite right. I mean, we got the devolved nations of Wales and Scotland, and yeah, they are doing what they can to make sure that they stay BTV free. I think it's really good that Wales or the Welsh government and DEFRA are working really closely together, as are the Scottish government. And, there's plenty of our sheep abattoirs that are in Wales, and a good number of those plants now have become designated to take the slaughter stock from the restricted zone. So it's been great that there's been no blockages or prevention of that trade. I think that's a really supportive thing.
Good.
But both Wales and Scotland have said that they are not prepared to take animals to live that come out of the restricted zone, whether they're blood tested or not. And it's a safety policy. The situation's moving rapidly. It does at the moment. Touch wood, but it does at the moment seem to be being contained within the restricted zone in England, which suggests to me that the movement policies are working. I hope I can still say that in a week or so's time. But I think it's right that every region and our devolved nations are careful and prudent as they possibly can be to stop the spread.
The very nature of our podcast, the Top Lines and Tails, of course, we do catch a lot of people who enjoy the shows and the pedigree livestock that goes to and from those areas. And obviously there's people now, in fact, there were people talking this year that the shows might be restricted to certain areas or certain parts of the country. And do we see some of that stop moving under license, Phil? I know there's been licenses granted for animals to be moved if they've been tested free. Do you think there may be a situation where the Royal Highland Show, for instance, next year might put a restriction on animals from a blue tongue area, but maybe shift them in by license if they've been tested free? Is that possible?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think it is. I think those restrictions could well continue. And at the moment, as I say, neither Wales nor Scotland are prepared to take any animals tested or not from within the restricted zone. They can move from other parts of England into Wales and Scotland, but not from within the restricted zone at the moment. And I think that, I would say, is likely to continue. I mean, it's important to note that everyone has accepted that the vaccines that are available are a really useful tool in the box, but they're not going to prevent the disease. And for that reason alone, I don't think we're going to be seeing vaccinated animals having any easier access to move into either Scotland or Wales. Vaccination is not going to protect stock in that way. So it will be very much about blood testing. And of course, things will emerge over these next weeks and months. But yeah, I think we will see some really careful approaches to movements, even into next summer. You can see it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that kind of where we thought that might come, and realistically I know Ireland had a case in February 2018. I read somewhere. Has there been cases in Wales? There have been cases in Scotland in the past that they don't have anymore? Are they? Is everybody as free as everybody else, Phil?
As far as we know, yeah. As far as we're aware, there's been no cases identified in Scotland or in Wales. There were, way back last winter, one or two suspect cases in Wales and on the Welsh border, but they were tested and they came back negative. So yeah, there's been no evidence of any disease in Wales or Scotland.
Hopefully so, and the honesty is there. And I mentioned foot and mouth earlier on. Of course, foot and mouth got into culling to control the disease. Foot and mouth also got into compensation, which in hindsight probably didn't control the disease, because when the movement restrictions were at their height and people couldn't move animals, then and they couldn't sell animals, getting foot and mouth actually was a logical option to some people. I wouldn't say to many, but to some people, which never didn't quite stop the disease in its tracks where it should have done. Do we think this will come into a culling situation if this blows up in our face?
No, I don't know. I really don't think so. And part of the reason for that really is the fact that part of the reason is probably the fact that it's not animal to animal spread. We've got vaccines developed for BTV3 now that should reduce mortality. And I think it is just, I say jest, it's not jest. I think it is one of those viruses that, we'll see now, we'll see some impact, we'll see the development of vaccines. And then you'd like to think that the vaccines will protect us. And like many, many viruses, it will diminish or will build immunity, or it'll change or adapt, or hopefully even die out in time to come, But what we don't want, I guess, is for this to become endemic long term in the UK. That's what we don't want. Which again is why I think it makes a lot of sense for people to follow the guidance, to be absolutely responsible in terms of their movements and check-ins, speaking to the vet, and doing whatever we can to try to stamp this out and stop it becoming endemic in the longer term.
Sure, endemic was an issue we all worried about, didn't we, with foot and mouth, that we had an endemic problem here.
We often
the world would take a product.
We often look at DEFRA and government to put in place the sort of controls that we need to protect us, and I think that's absolutely right, and they are doing that. But I also think that it should be seen as a shared responsibility. This is partly down to government and their controls and their regulation and all the stuff they've got going on around surveillance and testing. But there is an absolute responsibility on farmers and on the industry to do what we can as well in terms of reducing the risk and just being sensible about this and doing everything we can to stop the spread of this virus.
Wise words, Phil. And just one more question again that's coming through more in through social media. And again, social media, as you know, blows like a whirlwind when it gets going. And a lot of people saying this disease is coming in from the east there, coming in on boats and lorries and containers. And why don't we spray them all with DDT when they come out? Is there any truth in that? Could the midges be coming in with the ferries, maybe?
No, I think it's unlikely. There's always the risk, isn't there, that you might get a midge, an odd midge, coming in someone's car or on a lorry or through some plant material or something like that. But these are single midges, and it's quite clear to me from the information I've seen from the Met Office and APHA and Pirbright that the outbreak we've seen here aligns very much with wind speeds and wind direction at certain times, and those midges are coming over in big numbers. Not just single midges. It might be on a plant or locked in someone's car or whatever. These are bigger number of midges. So I would say no. I think it's unlikely. There is you can't say never, but it's the risk is much less than windborne incursion.
Okay, there we go, Phil. That's cleared that one up. And the last one, really, and I know you've got other things to do other than chat to me, but how is the general public and the general press, I suppose, how are they reacting to this at the moment? Is it another tool to beat farmers with? Obviously, they've all seen what happened with foot and mouth. Are they starting to raise, is the Chris Packham and the like starting to get a bit of ammo with this thing and raise awareness? Obviously, you've got to, you deal with the government, so you'll have a good idea for how they're portraying it to the general press.
I would say not at the moment. I'm not sure that the mainstream media have really picked up on this at any scale. Anyway, I think there's some confusion. There's plenty of confusion in the farming press, and there's quite a lot of confusion in the retail and supply chain press, if you like. But I think there's clearer information coming through now, and I'm not picking up any public backlash or even environmental campaign of backlash to this. If anything, any of the media that I am seeing, it is with some concern and sympathy or empathy for the farmers that are involved and having some pretty tough times at the moment.
Okay, and I really appreciate obviously the work that NSA does there, and of course you work closely with the AHDB, and I think the AHDB are doing seminars now, I believe, and that people can go there and learn a little bit more. Is there anywhere else that they can go apart from listening to this podcast that they can go and get some more information on this, so we can all be pretty well informed?
Yeah. Another really good question. I mean, we at the National Sheep Association, we're keeping our website up to date. So, anyone wants to go on there, you don't need to be a member. I'd love it if you are, but you don't need to be a member to get full access to our website. So you can go on our website, you can get some really good information there that's updated regularly. And our website also gives links then to the right pages on within DEFRA or on gov.uk and the right AHDB or Ruminant Health and Welfare Group pages as well. There's a great resource there through the Ruminant Health and Welfare Group. Lots of information there. I would say, keep your eye, as far as you can, keep your eye on those websites at the moment for ease of use. I would say this, wouldn't I? But for ease of use, just go onto the National Sheep Association web pages right on the front page, and that'll give you some links to other organisations where there's some good and accurate information. Gov.uk is much clearer than it used to be. So again, there's some good guidance there in terms of movement controls and those sorts of things. So and you're right. You're quite right. The AHDB Ruminant Health and Welfare Group are organising a series of webinars, and they're always a great way to get information out to a large group of people. I think last week's had some 1,400 people registered for it, which is great. You can get information to people really quickly, can't you, that way?
That's brilliant. Brilliant. Well, we'll post some of those links again on our Facebook page. Phil, I really appreciate your time taking to speak to us, because you must be a busy guy. This is another thing to your agenda when you've got plenty of things to do already, and the way you're dealing with the government and the way that you're I'd like to think you're helping us all out here by being the man and the voice point at the moment, and of course the expert on the blue tongue virus.
Well, no, I'm very pleased too. I appreciate the opportunity, actually, because it's really important that we try and, I suppose, expose some of the myths and give people as clear and accurate information as we can. So I'm happy to do this.
Well, it's great that we can provide a service to the farmers out there, not just through Top Lines and Tails, but through everything that we do. Phil, thanks very much for your time.
Good. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you for listening to this week's special episode of the Top Lines and Tails Livestock Podcast. And as always, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Harbro, for their continued support with this podcast. And Harbro, of course, are suppliers and manufacturers of quality livestock nutrition and nutritional advice. So get in touch with your local Harbro representative or find Harbro on the internet to see how they can help you with your autumn requirements when it comes to livestock. And Harbro, of course, are represented by country stores throughout Scotland, where you can pop in and browse and pick up a whole range of products there that'll help you with your livestock business. And let's hope that you're not caught up in that blue tongue area there, down there in the east. And let's all hope that this virus is kept under control, and I hope that you found this episode useful there in clarifying a few myths about the blue tongue virus. So those links will be available on the Top Lines and Tails Facebook page. Have a look there, or join our Top Lines and Tails community on Facebook, where you'll find more information to back up this episode.